So for people out there who think that it's impossible to sell a company like this, especially if it is your intellectual property in your face, I can tell you, I have been through this process. It is doable. It might be a dream business come true for somebody else who could not possibly have, number one, could never have competed with you to get to where you are. And number two, do not have the time to put in themselves to build up the email list and the SEO rankings and all, like everything that goes into it. They can just build on what you've already got instead of starting from scratch. And that's a huge benefit because you have some little piece of the business that is broken. It's like thinking, oh, I'll just sell it to get out of the problem. That won't work. It's very similar to like, you can't sell your house when there's a leak in the roof. You're going to have to fix that first.
If you want to build a legitimate, profitable online business without shiny objects, without the hypey gimmicks, and without the stress and overwhelm, if you want to make more money without having to be present online all day, every day, pumping out content that nobody sees and hustling DMs to generate leads and sales, then this is the place for you. Welcome to the Digital Trailblazer podcast, your online business university, where you'll learn how ordinary people start from ground zero with no influence, no email list or audience to sell to, and no business or marketing experience, and go from working 9-to-5 jobs to building successful 6- and 7-figure online businesses and all the steps in between. Learn the strategies that worked and what didn't. Learn the mistakes that they made and how to avoid them, and then learn their plans for scaling their businesses and taking things to the next level. All so that you can build your business faster and easier and make more money without sacrificing the things that are important to you in your life. I'm your host, Leah Ray Getz, and with me is my husband, Todd. Now, let's get to it with today's guest. Welcome. Today we have with us Jen Kilbourne. Jen, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience and give them a little of your history here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me, Leah and Todd. I appreciate being here. So, yes, my name is Jen. I have been in the online course world since about 2016. And being that it's 2024 now, I know it doesn't sound that long ago, but at the time, online courses were kind of a newer topic as far as online business. And I had I had a desire at that time to be doing more location independent work. So I was trying to, drum up some business for doing some websites for other professional organizers. It's a very special little industry niche. These are people who have businesses that come into your home and organize, kind of like Marie Kondo, the home edit. It's very popular now. And so in the course of setting up a website where I was going to help other professional organizers with their website, I came up with my own, just throw it in there. I'll just have a little online course about the setting up the business of professional organizing. That started as literally a PDF that I was trying to sell on Etsy for like $9. It was really hilarious. And I was like, oh, I'll just turn this into a course. Well, fast forward over the next 6 months to a year, running that course and running that program became my full-time job. So I, in the context of what you guys help people with and get them started, it was very much something that was a side project, afterthought that became quickly, because of the scale of the internet and how it was reaching people at that time, the full-time thing. So in 2020, I actually sold that entire company. The name of it is Pro Organizer Studio. I sold it to a colleague, so I know we'll be talking more about that today. And since then, I've been kind of laying low a little bit behind the scenes, helping other creators and authors and experts, create similar businesses, identify their intellectual property, and get them started online also.
So I think this is a really interesting topic because info products, coaching, courses, there's a lot of like, you can't sell that. Like, that's not a sellable thing. What are you talking about? Like people, and I've heard this from a lot of people and from varying directions. So I want to just kind of break this apart. Like, what was how even did you get it to a level that it was sellable? Mm-hmm. How did you grow it? And then the whole selling process, because most people think it's like, just make as much money as you can and then shut it down. It's sort of the mindset, because it's so intertwined with personal branding and there's so many different elements to it. So I'm just really curious on this whole journey for you.
Absolutely. Ask me anything. Because like you said, there's a lot of layers to it. I do think that a lot of people who run online courses do have the mindset that if they ever want to stop selling that program, or if their interests evolve into something else, or they completely want to pivot into another niche, that they're just like, okay, I just shut this down, or go, kind of have a retirement sale on the course and then move along. And in my case, and that may be true for some people, that they're able to just sort of let it go. In my case, and this is what I'm hoping to be a little tiny beacon of hope, if there's anybody else that was like me, where yes, I was the face of the company. It wasn't under my name, but I had a whole community. There was a whole, relationship aspect of it that I had built up. And it wasn't because I was shutting it down because it was not successful. It was mainly because it had grown to the point where I absolutely felt like there needed to be a leader who could take what I had built and then take it even to the next level. So for people out there who think that it's impossible to sell a company like this, especially if it is your intellectual property in your face, I can tell you, I have been through this process. It is doable. It's not easy to figure out. I used to Google like exit strategies for course creators all the time. There was nothing. And I even Googled that this morning to see if there is anything. And it's like, nope, there is still literally zero search results for that. So we're going to create one today.
Yes, that's awesome. So take us back to the beginning, and like, how did you actually build this? Mm-hmm. And then how far did you build it? Like, where did it get to?
Yes. So as I said, it was absolutely, it's a business program for other professional organizers who were getting started. I had a very different business pricing model, like package pricing model, that was very different than what was mostly being taught or shared by other experts at the time. And so I kind of put it together like, all right, it started off as a $700 program. By the time I left the company, it was still only $1,000 to take the program. And so this was very much built around like that signature course kind of model. That was, it was designed to really get them in, kind of go through the process. There was no really like higher ticket ascension type of thing on the back end. I, of course, had been told many times to offer something like that. But for that particular industry, there's just some various factors that I didn't personally want to go that direction. Mm-hmm. But what we did have constantly was the request to add on other courses that were a little bit more specialty, such as, hey, Jen, like, why don't you create your own organizing certification? And just me personally, I was like, I hear you. I see the requests coming in for that all the time, but I love teaching other people the business side. I didn't really truly have the desire or the skill set at that point, because then I had been running Pro Organizer Studio more than I had been working with clients. I was like, I'm not that special when it comes to actually doing the organizing. So we grew it, I grew it to the point and, using a lot of trial and error. Because as I said at the beginning, I didn't get into it thinking I'm going to be an online course creator. Like I'm going to be a coach. I really had to learn how to be a coach through the process of like unofficial coaching. Mm-hmm. And then I did end up getting a coaching certification a couple years into the business because I did want to raise up the professionalism. But when I left, or the day that I actually handed over the keys to my successor, now I didn't leave on that day, but if that makes sense, it was absolutely running pretty much as passive as you can get it on an evergreen webinar model. I had been doing podcasting at that point I'd been doing that for probably a little over 2 years. I had started off just doing super simple. In terms of just getting the company up and running, I was doing a very simple sort of live streaming on Facebook, re-uploading that to YouTube. I was not comfortable being on camera in front of the whole world. So I was just kind of like trying to keep it kind of low key at first, but the YouTube search engine really drove people back into Facebook group. So yeah, it was definitely a process. It was not until later that, I got into like, running ads to an evergreen webinar registration page, and getting people into the program that way. But once they were in our program, we did have a few other offers for them, but it was more of like a long-term nurture of like allowing people to stay in that group over time was just another big, like valuable part of it. Because professional organizers are so like uncommon relatively that they usually like want to stay and like make friends, other people that are like them. So that part was really fun. All right, so that was like the quickest version. What other questions do you have about all of that?
No, I love that. So what level did you get, like the group size and revenue, if you're comfortable talking about it? Like, what all did it get to before you're like, okay, this is something I can hand over, or even that someone would find valuable necessarily in purchasing? Because obviously there's tons of people who are more at beginner stages here. But there are people who are creating some success, growing, and now they're trying to maybe, all right, how far should I go?
Right.
If my ultimate is an exit.
Right. Okay. That's actually a really good question. So based on my experience, there's a couple of different factors that go into this. I mean, first of all, if what you are selling is functional, meaning that, again, there's some considerations that have to, of course, be in place, but assuming that, like I did, you do have to go through a transition period of bringing on another face of the business so that it's not just like, whoa, Jen ghosted us. Like, of course not, right? Like that's not for this type of business because I had been that person for so long. The level of success had to be dependent on and her name is Melissa. She's fabulous. She's wonderful. She, cares just as much about the community as I do, which was really important. But Melissa, really had to be able to look at it and say, okay, if I did nothing else other than purchase the business and then keep all the same processes running that Jen has already been doing, am I still, can I still reasonably expect to see the same results that would be based on SEO play? I had put years of work into SEO. Of course, that would have to be maintained ongoing with her, but the webinar funnel is like, converting at a certain percentage, and everything pretty much running, as smoothly as possible. Now, for her to come in, the instant ROI for her is, for example, and of course we had talked about this in conversations, all the due diligence that we had done in conversations leading up to it, is if in theory on day one she had her certification course ready to go to add on to what I was doing, she could have launched that to the existing email list and audience and had instant like doubling maybe of the business, right? Now, that didn't happen on day one because there was a lot of other things that kind of needed to happen in a certain order. But when you talk about what level we were at, I had brought in probably about $500,000 in revenue in the entire 3 to 4 years that I had the program running. Like I said, there was very few other things that I was really. I mean, that one course was truly the whole like main product. There would occasionally be like we did some retreats and events. Those are not like designed to be like huge money makers. We could have gone in that direction, I guess, if we wanted to, but that was prior to the whole COVID situation. It was like we weren't even thinking about having people fly around and do stuff like that. So, occasionally, for example, I would offer one-on-one coaching, but again, that was not a primary driver of the revenue, and it was not taken into consideration when Melissa was looking at the business as a machine, because obviously, if I'm not there, that revenue is kind of canceled out. So we were looking at it very much as this is an evergreen webinar funnel with this one program that now at this point had been highly, what's the word? Like we'd been continuously improving this course for so long, and we'd had this community that was so strong in there that she wasn't coming into it just like, hoping that it was working. It was like very clear. I could see all this data.
So there was a clear like conversion rates and everything from the webinar. Everything had been smoothly running for
holding very steady for a long time. Yes.
So this sounds to me like something where for example, if you've got a course that's based on a strategy that may not last very long, like for example, like our very first course was a Twitter strategy, which was based on a bunch of automations and things like that. And Twitter's changed a lot since then. And we actually stopped selling that course back in like late 2018, somewhere around there, because Twitter had just changed so much that we felt like it wasn't it wasn't as effective as it was when we first started selling it. So we just stopped selling it and we moved on to the next course.
Right.
So something like that, I'm assuming is not going to be something that you're going to be able to sell like that. Or even like if I were to put together a Facebook ad, like we have to update our Facebook ads course like on a yearly basis because the Facebook ads just changes, even just the look and feel. Like functionally, there hasn't been a lot of changes, but just the look and feel in the places where the buttons are and all that, we just have to redo things because I move things around.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like if you've got a business where you're teaching something where it's more principle based, or, based on principles rather than actual like point and click, here's how tutorials on how to do something in a software, that's probably going to be something more likely to either to sell or to get a higher price, right?
Mm. Well, and you do bring up a good point because yes, this company was built around a type of professional development, not an actual strategy. But I would argue, Todd, that if you had built up a company over years that you had at different times sold different digital marketing, like whether it was Twitter or Facebook ads or whatever, and if you got to the point where you're just like, I don't want to teach digital marketing at all anymore, like you wanted to go in a different direction, that email list that you built up and whatever platform or whatever you had been doing regularly would have, and I can, speak to this. I also have a workshop about this, is actually like these things are like line items on an actual business valuation. Your email list, your whatever acquisition strategies you have had going on, like your podcast, that alone is like it is an actual certain value that adds to the multiple of what you can ask for the company. So when I say multiple, that means, just to dumb it down into the simplest terms, because of course I'm not a certified accountant in terms of being able to talk about this, but just, from the seller's side, it is very much like selling a house that you built yourself. And so you want to maintain those assets. You want to have an idea of like what it's worth. Just because it's nice to even just build a business knowing that, hey, this is actually worth something to somebody else. It's not just me and it's not just a hobby. But when you talk about the multiple, it is based on the last 12 months of revenue that has come into the company. And then, of course, you have to take into consideration factors like, okay, if Todd and Leah are not the faces of the company, that person who does come and buy this business, for example, the multiple will be adjusted down slightly because it's like, okay, they can't come in and be Todd and Leah. They're going to have to come in and be somebody else, but they're building on what Todd and Leah have established. And so that multiple, the multiple takes into account the fact that you have to transfer like the face of the company in itself. But yeah, Todd, so like, I think what you're saying makes sense only if somebody knows that like they have something that is working really well and that they would be sad to see it just shut down completely if they didn't personally want to run it anymore. It might be a dream business come true for somebody else who could not possibly have, number one, could never have competed with you to get to where you are. And number two, do not have the time to put in themselves to build up the email list and the SEO rankings and all, like everything that goes into it. They can just build on what you've already got instead of starting from scratch. And that's a huge benefit, especially for the more, competitive and strategic people of the world out there. It's the way to go.
Yeah. And I know another part of this is, for example, let me ask you this. Did you have any employees, like any sales team, any customer support, any other people like that came with the business?
Great question. I always ran it. I had one part-time employee long-term. We tried to keep things pretty streamlined just between the two of us. But ironically, she, my employee who had been with me for a long time, at the same time that I was going through the selling process, she had already decided to go off and kind of branch off and do her own thing with her own web design company. So when Melissa came on, she actually opted. I mean, she could have chosen so many different things. She could have hired a whole team to take care of everything for her, so she didn't have to do a single thing. But she chose to do both my job and Bree's job. And that's partially, that was another option, for somebody who comes in that wants to, to be polite, I liked to spend money on the business, and Melissa was a little bit more of a like, let's cut costs, like let's optimize. At least, that made her more comfortable just like going into it, is that she wanted to, do both of those roles for a while and then decide which parts that she wanted to, outsource or have any kind of contractors for. So no, my employee did not go with the business, but all of our processes were literally handed over like in a handbook so that Melissa could either have the hiring process ready to go on day one, or that she would know exactly how to continue everything like as usual.
And the thing is, we're somewhat familiar with the concept of selling an e-commerce business, like, Amazon FBA or something like that. And just like you said, like the things that add the value to the business are, number one, your email list. Can that business survive off of Amazon? Do you have a website? How much traffic are you getting to the website? Earnings over the past 12 months. And I know like part of the strategy, like when people build a business specifically for the purpose of selling it in 2 or 3 years, part of what they do is I think they don't take a salary, or they take a very low salary in order to make those numbers look better for the people who are looking at investing. And I guess the other question I have is, how do you determine how much you're going to sell the business for? Because I know for like e-commerce businesses, they have something called EBITDA, like earnings before interest, taxes, depreciate, something like that, right?
Right.
But it's a specific formula that they use to determine the value of the business, and then they do a multiple of that. So it might be 3 or 4 times EBITDA, over the past 12 months, right?
Yeah. No. So it's actually very similar to that. So just on the topic of getting a official valuation for an online company, they're actually extremely hard to come by. I mean, because if you were selling a brick and mortar store, you would have a CPA like tax firm come in, and they would literally like go through your building, look at your inventory. Like they're doing like a true like official, like there's a certified official valuation, at least in the US. You can't do that with an online business. One, because it's all intangible, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I actually worked with someone in this process. He was based in Canada at the time, and he and I actually talked a few weeks ago. And he's not directly working in this same exact niche anymore. But he and I talked about Flippa.com, which is very well known for selling like your Amazon like drop shipping businesses, e-commerce, blogs, Amazon affiliate sites that are like just so passive income. Those do get they're a little bit, of course, they're easier to buy and sell because they're not dependent on anybody's personality or really expertise or their story. They are a little bit easier to sell on a marketplace like that. But he and I talked about how that still is probably the best option for people who are getting started, even if they're in a situation like mine where you can't have just anybody come and buy it. Like it has to be somebody who really cares about continuing to nurture like what has been built and who has some industry expertise to add to it. But the whole EBITDA and the multiple, it was that exact same process. And the multiple is just, it's for like a online course creator or somebody who is the face of a company, it's going to be around 2 to 3x rather than like 3 to 4x. And of course, there's going to be a lot of other factors that it depends on too. As I mentioned, I do have a workshop on going a little bit deeper into this topic, because I know some people will just be curious, like, well, just for kicks and giggles, like what could I get for my company? It's kind of just nice to know.
So that's awesome. So the workshop would give people that access to kind of give some estimates for them.
Yes.
Okay. That sounds great. So we were recently in a mastermind with 7 and 8 figure earners who were this topic came up, and we're talking about selling businesses. And what I found was insightful, probably for a lot of people, is the fact that having a big thing is having multiple traffic strategies and having, like, if you're running solely off of Facebook ads, even if you're doing incredibly well, that's super risky to a buyer, and that they like having SEO, having these different things that are spread out clearly brings the value up and lowers the risk necessarily, because it's essentially the risk if something happens with Facebook ads, or they know that the cost of Facebook ads always goes up or whatever, right? So yeah, I thought that was an interesting thing. Like, all right, how serious have you been on your SEO lately?
Right. Yeah. No, there's definitely value with the long-term any long-term thing that you've been doing, because it's like, it's very hard to build it. It's very hard to keep that. And it's very hard for it to just suddenly fall off as long as you continue to maintain it. And so I will just call out for that reason, the fact that Melissa still says to this day, she's like, when you started that podcast, it was the best thing you ever did, because that was so far ahead of what any of my competitors were doing at that time. And again, it builds just long-term relationships, long-term links, like long-term SEO that is not, like you said, right, it's not dependent on any particular paid strategy that might fall, on or off or whatever. And, and it's really interesting too, because as the owner in my tenure, there were certain things that I liked doing and didn't like doing. I really had this like strong distaste for Instagram. And so I was just doing it just to do it. I wasn't doing it because I loved it. And, she came in and was like, I'm going to love this. Like, I'm going to enjoy adding on this like other community aspect that has, again, that was not really one of Jen's favorite things, but, so it gives her own creativity to play with too, as far as the things that she enjoys and is good at, that I had not maximized at all. Cause I just said, these things are not that important to me, but I'd been working very hard on, like you said, being so far ahead of the podcast game at that time and that type of thing. But yeah, so the long-term organic stuff is definitely going to make it more attractive to the investor for sure.
So another question I would have is, as far as the name of your business, because a lot of people have like their own name as the name of their, so it'd be like right. toddgetz.com, toddgetzcoaching.com, or whatever, right?
Yes.
So is that going to make a big difference? Because I mean, there's other companies out there that were attached to it, like Jim Rohn, right? That company is still going. They're still selling products, and so they're still going, even though Jim has passed away. Is that going to affect how much you can get for it, or even if you have like a different, like Digital Trailblazer? If you have a name like that, is that something that you need to get trademarked, or you want to get trademarked? Is that going to play up an important part of that? And by the way, we did trademark Digital Trailblazer, so anybody.
So, yeah, those are really good questions. So just based on my own experience, here's what I'll say. So I did not have to make that decision, since I had never made the decision to have it under my own name. And obviously it's kind of philosophical. I'm like, I don't know what I want my name to be associated with long term. So I had never put those two things together. So with Pro Organizer Studio, then that name itself was not trademarked, but my program, Inspired Organizer, absolutely was. So I will say that as far as intellectual property and trademarking, that was certainly a thing that increased the value of the company, because while it was something that I created and designed, and my face and voice is in the course, it's not like I got deleted from the history. It's just that was my intellectual property. It was all recorded out there. And then I had a small, when you asked about team, I only had one person internal working with me in the company, but I did have several of my own coaches that were inside the Inspired Organizer program. So it had been well established for quite some time before that it was not always going to only be Jen answering questions. In fact, it was probably primarily going to be one of the coaches, because that was just how we had been running it for so long. So that Inspired Organizer program was trademarked. It did have its own URL, kind of, like separate aspect to it. So if somebody was listening to this and they were like, how do I, as toddgetz.com, exit my own company, without because you probably want to take toddgetz.com with you, because you want to decide what that means for the rest of your life. So I would say they would probably, as part of the preparation, want to go into a little bit of rebranding and establishing some different domain names, URLs, and making that the thing that you're handing over when you hand over the keys on the day of. But you do have a lot of control over the whole, a little bit behind the scenes legally. Of course, this is not a DIY project. You have to actually work with attorneys on both sides. Like I said, it's very similar to closing on a house. And there can be things that you negotiate specifically, like, yes, I'm selling the house, but I'm taking these custom curtains. Those don't stay. And that can be something that you say, Todd, for somebody who has their own name, they could even be starting to sort of shop the process a little bit, but say, hey, this is going to be under this one umbrella. You're not getting Todd Getz, you're not getting the name, but you're getting all of the assets that are underneath this one aspect of the business. So it's, I mean, like they say, everything's negotiable. This is no different. There's not really any hard and fast rules. You just really have to have, very, very clear expectations. Even if you're like super friendly, of course, you want to be with your future buyer because that's good for both of you. You get everything in contract, get everything in writing, like exactly. And, and there's even parts of our contract where it had to be outlined that even though Melissa now owns assets that have my name and my face in them, it does not give her the right to use my likeness or to, what I'm saying? It's like we had to, it's just a part of the legal process. It's like you don't, like Jen's, you do not own the right to Jen's likeness at any future point in time, AI generated or not. It's kind of like you have to cover all those bases.
Yeah, and I will say, just from our own personal experience of rebranding and switching domains and all that, because we had built our business to 7 figures under a different domain and under a different brand name before starting the digital trailer. And it was toddandleahray.com. We still have the domain, but it's just parked. But our whole email list, like all of our emails were coming from toddandleahray.com, like everything. And we just decided, we kind of switched directions on our business because that's the time we were doing network marketing and affiliate marketing and training on those types of things. And now we kind of pivoted to coaches, course creators, and we're in a very different niche, even though they're related. But that's when we switched over to the digital Trailblazer. But we took our email list, we moved over to the digital Trailblazer. We kind of told everybody what was happening. And so you can't, if even when you build a business up to 7 figures, it is possible to rebrand, get a different domain, and make the transition. It's just a bit of a process. So if anybody's thinking, I would just say, if anybody's thinking about doing this and you want to disconnect your personal brand from your business and start something else, it's totally possible to do that.
Yes, very, very true.
What would be like one piece of advice to leave with folks who are looking at, they're eyeing a future exit? So it's not happening right now, right? But that is their future goal that they're looking at in their business.
Yeah. I have a definite answer on this one, and it is this. Everything about getting into online business, starting one, growing it, scaling it, like there's not a lot of people talking about exit strategies. One, because yes, it really only applies in certain situations. Because to Todd's point, it probably is easier to, if you want to pivot to something that builds on the same email list you already have, for example, like deciding to sort of offer like these other things. Of course, that would have been easier. But as I said, in some cases, if I knew that this was not my long-term dream house, but it was somebody else's, I felt that it deserved the chance and opportunity to do that. But what I will say is now it's not lost on me that one of the reasons why I was so able to have success with this, and it happened really quickly, was because naturally I'm a very organized person, because I'm teaching other organizers how to run their own businesses. I'm like, well, I have to have some very special insight about what it takes to systemize things and have processes for everything. And so I will say that the reason why it was able to be done in the time frame that it was because I had already done all of that hard work of, you get to a point where you're, you do have processes for things. You can take a vacation and know that everything is still running. Like you have that, as passive as it gets. I never quite say it's ever passive, but you know what I'm saying? It's like as passive it can get. I had already done all of that. And so when I talk to people now that ask that same question about what is the one piece of advice, it's like, again, I go back to that house metaphor of when you want to throw in the towel because you have reached sort of like a brick wall that you keep like running into. Like I hate, there's like something in your business that you just like can't stand doing. Like you still can't stand marketing yourself or promoting yourself, or you just have like, you're just like over it or whatever, because you have some little piece of the business that is broken. It's like thinking, oh, I'll just sell it to get out of the problem. That won't work. It's very similar to like, you can't sell your house when there's a leak in the roof. You're going to have to fix that first. And so the thing that I tell people is that whether you want to ride that wave and scale it up as far as it can go, and, you know, do the whole automation thing and do team, you know, have a team that handles everything for you to where you can sort of step back and just be the owner and not have to be involved in the day-to-day business anymore, and let other people be your program directors and make all those decisions. And you just sort of say, hey, it's like owning an Airbnb. You can choose to do that if you are just kind of tired of the being in the work of it. But the thing is that the process for whether you sell it or whether you do that is still the exact same thing. So you kind of have to work through all of your leadership issues. You have to work through, again, I had made the decision that there were certain things that I was ready and willing to do and other things that I did not want to. And I had automated and made it as passive as possible under those constraints as I was willing to go. But I knew that this was not my forever. Like it is very much like raising a child and then giving it up for an adoption. Like it's very emotional, but it's like I knew that it was best served by someone who had a little different, of course, a different skill set than me, but also a slightly different, bigger, long-term vision for where that industry is going. And I wanted to truly, I didn't want to be the Airbnb host, right? Like I didn't want to still be like, okay, I have a whole team that's managing everything, but you know, I didn't want to psychologically be waking up in the middle of the night still worried or thinking about different things, or like be on the hook if something was going wrong. I really wanted Melissa to have full permission, confidence, like the full ability to really take ownership and go in the direction that she saw that it needed to go and that it wanted to go already. I wanted her to truly have it that way. I didn't want to stay connected and like, even in like a psychological entanglement thing. I just was like, I'm going to let you start driving the bus and I'm going to ride in the passenger seat for a while. That was our contract of, you know, making sure that she was going to be successful. Of course, that's, you know, a win-win for both of us. But then really just step aside and say, this is her thing. I mean, this is hers. And it has truly been the most beneficial long-term thing for everybody involved. And so it's something I'm really grateful for.
The other question I think people probably have is how long does it take once you've decided that you want to sell? Like what do you have to do to prepare? How long does it take to actually make the sale? Again, like from e-commerce, what we know from e-commerce, it's like at least a 12 or 18 months process. Mm-hmm. And you got to start preparing and you got to start keeping good records. You got to start doing things to maximize the profits, which means you're taking less money for yourself. Mm-hmm. And then over the course of that 12 or 18 month period, the person who's buying the company wants to see like steadily growing income and revenue and profits and all that stuff. It's not like you can decide to sell and just kind of stop doing things. And then, you know, within 30 or 60 days, it's gone and you're like, oh yeah, sucker, bye. Right.
Oh yeah. No. Okay. A lot of good points you just raised. So first of all, I was absolutely told, even though I said I was already at the point where I had everything systemized, like we got SOPs for everything. My employee, Bree, and I do want to give a special shout out to the fact that we were one of the earlier students in a program called Run Like Clockwork, which is Adrian Dorison and Mike McAllowitz that had launched that program back in 2018, I want to say. And so we had, you know, gone through their process of really, how do you systemize? How do you automate? How do you, you know, remove, like make sure that you are doing the only things that you can do. So even when I approached the guy who I ended up working with to value the business, and he was kind of guiding me along with some aspects of the sale, he's like, oh, well, even though you already have all that done, he was like, you need to assume that you need to spend the next 6 to 12 months working harder than you ever have to increase, because the biggest thing that impacts your selling price is your last 12 months of revenue. And so this would have been the time that it was like, okay, now you need to get as many sales as possible or add on new revenue streams or do basically, you know, doing all of that. And that was a little bit disheartening for me because I had, again, this really kind of ties into the personal story, but I had really reached a point where I knew that I needed to really, really like step away for a while and kind of like not be the face of any business. It was not just that one. It was like, I need to kind of like, you know, to not be doing podcasts and not be doing videos. And I was like, whoa, I don't think I'm in a position to spend another 6 to 12 months, you know, doubling down on all this stuff. So I got very lucky in the fact that because I already had a feel for 2 or 3 people that I had considered that would be likely qualified and interested to actually, work to find, this would be called like a private buyer versus like listing it on a marketplace like flippa.com. That's like putting it on a marketplace. And yes, there are people who will buy companies like that. And I was just like, I'm not sure if that feels right. I got very lucky in that one of the few people that I had talked to about it was genuinely interested, and that she was relatively we were just on the same page. So for us, I first floated out the idea to her, not in any sort of official way. It was just sort of like, I almost kind of raised it like as a joke a little bit. And I'm going to say this out loud because I think that, there could be other people who feel this way, where I just was like, I love my people, and I love my company, and I love my life. I was like, but I don't know what the end game is. Like, I said to her, I said, I think I'm going to have to fake my own death to like get out of this industry, because now everybody only knows me for this one thing. And I do want to do a lot of other things. And I just didn't really see the end goal or the end game, I didn't know what the options were, other than just eventually shutting it down one day. And I was afraid that maybe I needed to do that. And she's the kind of, she was a colleague. So she had been working, and she had expert knowledge of the industry and had also been coaching other professional organizers. And she was just sort of like, LOL, you would never do that. She was like, but I would help you fake your own death. And if you were ever interested, in selling your company, she was like, maybe I would. And I was like, oh, you didn't know I was actually being kind of serious, right? So that was sort of how the conversation started. It wasn't like I had this like professional pitch deck on day one. It was sort of like, well, we'll just take the next step of, signing an NDA and talking about the financials and talking about what this looks like. And then, she and I kind of worked through that at the same time that I was working with the guy who did my valuation. And he could have worked as a broker, but he didn't need to, because I found my own buyer. So it was actually a pretty straightforward process. I think she and I first had that conversation in like maybe June of 2020. And we closed the deal in October.
Wow.
So it was relatively fast. Yeah. I mean, actually very fast. But again, I will say, because we were so organized about it, that really absolutely helped. So it's getting yourself to that point that even puts you in the position for it to be possible.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So if people want to learn more about you, where should they find you?
Yes. So my company name now is under Every Dear Communications. So it's every Dear, DEAR, like Dear Jen, Dear Leah, Dear Todd. So it's everydear.com. And I focus more now on helping people with an entire communication strategy, helping people identify what their intellectual property is in the first place. I really enjoy that part. And helping people kind of build an authentic brand. That's kind of what Every Dear is about, like referring to your audience like they're not just numbers. These are actual people, and they want you to talk to them like somebody that they actually vibe with. So Every Dear Communications, that would be, I've been, like I said, kind of working behind the scenes with some other clients in totally different industries, like things that had nothing to do with organizing, because I sort of just needed that. I wanted a new challenge. I think I'm a type of person who really loves the startup phase, not so much the long-term maintenance part. So that's been really fun for me. And, in trying different strategies with like totally different niches and seeing that it still works, like that's really exciting for me. And I still love everything about the internet and marketing. And I also this year have started working a little bit more closely with Kajabi, just as as an affiliate partner, but also I got approved as one of their earliest like Kajabi experts for they're offering, vetted people to kind of help you run your Kajabi business. So that's a little bit of my area that I've been working in since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned a few times your workshop. So
yes. So this would be for people who are just a little curious. They're like, wait, tell me more. So you're telling me that even if I have a company that is running well and it's digital courses and it's my brand, it's my face, it might even be my name, like Todd brought up, that you're saying that this still has an actual value, like it's got a street value, like it does. And I think that that's very empowering to realize that. Because when we're doing all of this, launching courses and creating all the things that we do, podcasts and social media accounts, like I feel like there's times when you feel like I'm just sort of making this up, right? Like, yes, you're an expert, but when you build these things, it's because it is intangible and it's not what people think of in terms of like traditional business assets. It's like, well, seeing and recognizing that your podcast has a value, your website has a value, all this work you've been doing on SEO is like, it's like being in the really good neighborhood. It's like, wow, this is like, it's nice to know that this has actual, like, this is part of your assets. And that these things, even if you never want to sell a business, you could literally hand it down to your children. And when you brought up Jim Rohn, I don't know if his family runs it or if they sold the company prior to his death, but that would be something that's really important for people to know, that just because you are no longer there, whether you're physically with us on this planet anymore or not, that it's something that can continue to, it can continue to be a business asset in the long term. I really want people to know that even if they're not actually interested in selling their company. So my resource about this, it is a workshop, and it's going to go a little bit more into the details for somebody who is the face of their company, just understanding when we're saying that it has a value, what does that mean and how much, like how could we roughly estimate that? So I will take you through a process that is kind of the simplified version of the business valuation that I went through, but it will just tell you like, oh, it helps you make smarter decisions too, because it's, there's so many things that you can continue to invest in for your company, for your business. And I'm one of those people who loves to spend money, as I said before. It's nice to recognize once you've actually valued your company, like as if it were a real valuation, you can actually say, oh, if I invest in this next high ticket program, what specifically is that going to track to on my business valuation worksheet? The same way, if you were somebody who's being really smart about making improvements to your house, you're not going to do things just because it looks cool. You want to actually add to the market value of your home, or at least not take away from it by doing some crazy customization that nobody's ever going to want if you're actually going to sell your house later. So I use that metaphor a lot because it works perfectly with what this process is about.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I thank you so much for sharing this with our audience, because I feel like there's so many questions and people need to be able to make informed decisions about their businesses, about their future, where they're going. So we really appreciate you. This is such an interesting conversation.
You're welcome. And I appreciate it too. I also just want to share that, this is definitely one of those like adulting things that I've done that until you do it, you think, oh gosh, that seems like so intimidating, especially when it comes to stuff like tracking, being for real about your numbers. I don't even like doing my own monthly accounting, much less my taxes, much less something as complicated as this is. And so that's why I did feel like I do want to give this back as something that, I can really relate to, kind of wanting to avoid a little bit. But then once you hear somebody explain it and you're just like, now I know how to value my business like a real business valuation, but not because I'm not the legal mind or even the attorney or even the CPA, but just from the seller's point of view, just recognizing, treasure what you're doing. Like it's important, not just for your own, it's sort of as a mental health thing. It's like even on days or weeks where it's a little slow, or you're not going directly in the direction that you thought, or you're not getting the results that somebody promised you right away. It's like, if you keep on keeping on, you see that the consistency over time is building something truly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you, Jen.
You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, go check her out. She definitely grab the workshop. It sounds really cool. And have a blessed day.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. For show notes and information about today's guest, head to digitaltrailblazer.com. Now, if you love this episode, if you got some value, make sure you leave us a review and subscribe. And be sure to share this episode with anyone you know who could use help to build their business. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.